right, well, let's continue. We were talking about evolutionism, which is a New Age religion last week, and we're going to continue on with this. Still got a ways to go. Now, one of the things, and like I said, I've been renovating this article we have on there, and Tim, you actually might want to make a note that I don't know whether you noticed or not that I left the link up to there's an article that was called Lies of Evolution, Geologic column. I've actually moved that I transferred it into this article. And the link I left up, but the link will automatically redirect you to that section of this article where that is. So it's not like I haven't, for people who've posted that link somewhere, I made a way to get back into this, but I really felt it was more appropriate in this article to get a whole understanding of this issue. But anyway, last week what we were talking about was the different definitions of evolution. We talked about, how science and evolution, that they don't go together. Religion and evolution, that is the appropriate definition for these. And what evolution actually means, how it's defined in the textbooks, which are their documentations, okay, for their religious beliefs. Now what we're going to do is move on, but I wanted to make note of this real quick, that most states in the United States have a criteria for schools in their laws, okay? Laws and bylaws and all that for a state have an instructional materials section that you can go look up, okay? And any of you guys that go look these up, I actually verified these are still there. Yesterday, I think, I was updating some references, and I went to go look these up on some of these state websites. But Wisconsin, for example, has a law that requires instructional materials in public schools and libraries to be accurate in terms of content and free of bias and stereotype. Well, that's good. The curriculum has to be that. In Texas, they have one that says, quote, instructional materials should present the most current factual information accurately and objectively without editorial opinion or bias by the authors. Theories should be clearly distinguished from fact and presented in an objective educational manner, end quote. Well, that's pretty reasonable as far as I can see. I mean, should we not leave out the bias and opinion and simply teach the facts? Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. Florida has one. It says, quote, in addition to relying on statements of publishers or manufacturers of instructional materials, the commissioner may conduct or cause to be conducted an independent investigation to determine the accuracy of state-adopted instructional materials. So they can actually go in and investigate these things to make sure the materials are correct. Part 3 of this says the commissioner may remove materials from the list of state-adopted materials if he or she finds that the content is an error and the publisher refuses to correct the error when notified by the department, end quote. So they can just fully remove the stuff if it's not even correct. I think that's reasonable. Contact the publisher, hey, you guys need to correct this on here. And if they refuse to, then remove it. Well, I would say that's another reasonable law. This one's California, quote, the state board shall adopt basic instructional materials for use in kindergarten and grades 1 through 8 inclusive for governing boards subject to the following provisions. At point 3, they say that these materials should be factually accurate and incorporate principles of instruction reflective of current and confirmed research, end quote. Well, that's, again, pretty reasonable as far as I can see. But I want to point something out that Indiana, the state I live in right now, does not have a law in its instructional materials code that requires factual accuracy in textbooks. Now, if any of you who live in Indiana are listening to these, that might be a good project for one of you who have the time to pick that up. If you have the conviction to pick that up to make sure that the state of Indiana includes a law, it should not be that difficult to get. That's a reasonable law requiring that things be factual or be removed. I think that would be pretty reasonable. And I don't know anybody that would disagree with that, okay? It doesn't matter whether it's creationist or evolutionist or any other flavor in between. I think everybody would agree that textbooks should be factually accurate. Unfortunately, what happens is that many of these states, they don't enforce those laws. And they don't have like somebody policing the whole thing, okay? Really, the school boards are supposed to be made up of the parents. They're supposed to be. They aren't really most of the time, but they're supposed to be made up of the parents. And it's the parents over that community school that are supposed to be overseeing the curriculum in the schools, but most of them don't take the time to do it. Why? Well, laziness for the most part. Nobody wants to read through all that stuff to verify and check these things out. But there are people in all the different states, there are Christians out there that would be more than willing to come into some of these schools, check out some of the information that's in these things, and show where there is inaccurate and false information that should not be in these textbooks at all. There was one guy I was listening to that was talking about a school in which they said you can't deface textbooks. Okay? You shouldn't deface a textbook, meaning that defacing, saying that you're writing over what they put in and writing in anything else. Okay, so the guy was talking with this. It was like a Q&A session. We shouldn't be defacing textbooks. So he asked this teacher. He says, if you were teaching math and you saw a math book that said 2 plus 2 equals 5, what would you do? He says, well, I'd have the students mark out the wrong answer and write in the right answer. He goes, oh, you would deface a textbook? He told him right straight on there, he says, you, sir, are a hypocrite, and you have no business teaching anything in these public schools. You ought to be out picking peaches or changing tires. You don't have any business teaching in the public school system. Amen to that, he doesn't, okay? Because they're hypocrites. They love their religious beliefs in evolutionism. That's what the whole thing is trying to protect. And you see, if the evolutionist comes along and says, I don't like this bill, okay, one of the things, they were trying to get one of these laws passed in a state. I was listening to another guy talking about they were trying to get one of these laws passed in a state. And so he came to give presentations showing lies in the textbooks, showing, just different basic things that we'll probably cover in the future here. Talking about the geologic column stuff and things like, dinosaurs and the birds and all this kind of stuff. It's all this religious nonsense. He was showing even things just simply like the embryo and the mother having gill slits. That is not true. That has never been true. That was a lie that was proven wrong in 1874, and it's still being taught today, 130 years later. Okay, or 140 years later. It's still being taught. Because, again, it's a religion. It's a cult. So, just showing that these things have been proven wrong and should not be in textbooks. The guy was giving a presentation for 45 minutes, and then one of these ACLU lawyers or something like I can't remember who it was, stood up and said, wait a second, he says, this bill is not constitutional, this is an anti-evolution bill. Never once was evolution mentioned. The term evolution, none of that was ever mentioned. It's simply the way the person was going through was showing certain things. This is a lie, we need to take this out. And one of the people on the board who was judging over the matter, he said, ma'am, this is not an anti-evolution bill. Evolution is not mentioned anywhere in here. We're simply addressing these things that are lies that should not be in the textbook. And she said, well, all these things are used to support the evolution theory. Well, duh. If all you have is lies to support your theory, then maybe you should try to find a new theory. Or maybe you should wake up and realize that you believe in a religion that is based on lies. Anyway, it is up to the parents. Parents, you have children in the public school system, they're learning this stuff, you are responsible. God is not holding the state responsible for where you sent your children. If you sent them to the state, God doesn't hold them responsible for that, you are held responsible. Okay? Whoso should offend one of these little ones which believed in me, it were better than a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. That's Jesus Christ saying that, okay? Direct quote from the Bible, Jesus Christ saying that. Now I'm saying that, does he hold them responsible for teaching? Oh yeah, everybody's going to be held responsible for what they teach, but parents, don't think that you are not held responsible in your ignorance, okay? You need to take responsibility for the education of your children. God gave you that responsibility. So let's continue. Now, last week we ended talking about, and I'm going to give you this quotation, I guess. We talked about the different definitions of evolution. The evolution definitions 1 through 5, they're all religious, 100% religious. You have to believe in those. There has never been any evidence for those whatsoever. And I quoted David Berlinski, who's an agnostic. He's not a Christian at all. But I'm going to quote you this one more time before we continue here. He says, quote, let's put it this way. Before you can ask, is Darwinian theory correct or not, you have to ask the preliminary question, is it clear enough so that it could be correct? That's a very different question. One of my prevailing doctrines about Darwinian theory is, man, that thing is just a mess, like looking into a room full of smoke. Nothing in the theory is precisely, clearly, carefully defined and delineated. It lacks all the rigor one expects from mathematical physics, and mathematical physics lacks all the rigor one expects from mathematics. So we're talking about a gradual descent down a level of intelligibility until we reach evolutionary biology. We don't even know what a species is, for heaven's sake." End quote. So, what is a species? And this is one that I have talked to evolutionists about, and I do have to admit, I enjoy a little bit watching them run around in circles on this one. For some reason, it just, after a while, it starts to get annoying and you don't want to hear it anymore. But they run around in circles all the time. Most evolutionists that I have talked to refuse to admit they don't know what a species is. They are insistent. Now, we're talking about just the average evolutionist out there, somebody we've tried to have on our, who's emailed us or something like that. They say, yes, we know what a species is. They are insistent that they know what this is. Let me show you the truth of the matter here. This is from a biology and this is definitely an evolutionist biology website. It's run by it's called Biology Online Dictionary. It's run by a large group of biology majors. They're both researchers and teachers, professors who actually operate this website. Here is the definition they gave for species. An individual belonging to a group of organisms, or the entire group itself, having common characteristics and are usually are capable of mating with one another to produce fertile offspring. Now, let's break it down slowly. The first part, having common characteristics. This common characteristic, I mean, it could be hair or color or breathing oxygen. What characteristic are you specifically referring to? Well, any. It could be anything. Anything you can imagine. It may or may not be hair. It may or may not be color. It may or may not be breathing oxygen. It also says it's an individual or the entire group itself. So it may or may not be an individual, and it may or may not be a group. It says usually capable of mating with one another. So if it's not an individual, if it's a group and not an individual, it may or may not be capable of mating with others in the group. Do any of you have an idea of what a species is yet, based on this definition? Or are you more confused as to what a species is? I mean, to me, this is even more confusing. Now, a species, according to, now this is another one, this is called the Macroevolution Online Biological Dictionary. And I found this gentleman who runs this, a guy by the name of Eugene McCarthy, he's an evolutionary theorist and geneticist, gave this definition under his Macroevolution Online Biological Dictionary, which you can go look this up yourself, okay? I really appreciate, now this man of course believes in a really stupid religion, but I appreciate his honesty on this point. He says a species is a given type of organism that is treated as a species, or it says a given type of organism is treated as a species if it is assigned a binomial name. Now, let me read that one more time in case I didn't read it very well there. A given type of organism is treated as a species when? If it is assigned a name. Do you understand what he's saying here? If they call it a different species, then it's a different species. Do you realize this definition is open-ended to mean anything they want it to mean? At any time, at any point. Do you see why that David Berlinski, he's the professor of molecular biology and mathematics that we were talking about, why he says we don't even know what a species is, and he says, is Darwinian theory clear enough that it could be correct? He's saying it's not clear enough that it could be correct because it's not defined properly. This geneticist that I was referring to, he continues in his definition and says there is no general consensus among scientists concerning how to decide whether any given group of organisms should be treated. What he's saying here, he says there's no general consensus among scientists as to what a species is. And he finishes by saying, since there is no general agreement on the definition of the word species. Well, thank you, sir, for your honesty. I appreciate that. Okay? But most evolutionists don't even understand that they have that the general scientific community has no idea what a species is. You see, what I generally end up talking to are people that do not understand what they actually believe. They don't understand enough about the religion of evolutionism to even know how to talk about it, which is why I've had so many people refuse to talk about evolution, to come on our show, our podcast show, and talk about evolution with me. I've had many, many, many refuse. There are many atheists that says, I'll come on your show and I'll talk about this. I've had even ones that says, I'll come on and talk about evolution, but as soon as I get them on Skype, or we, like usually I have a little Skype meeting, I'll meet with them for a couple minutes on Skype before we talk to make sure their equipment's working properly. That's one of my requirements. I got to make sure your microphone's working properly. I don't want you to just show up and I get everything ready for this and then you don't have any stuff that works properly. And I want to make sure that they're telling the truth about who they are as well. When I get them over Skype, what they usually do, I said, okay, so you said you would come on and talk about this evolution stuff, right? And they're like, well, I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. And then they try to talk about it, they want to talk about a different subject, which is why we have so many atheists that want to come on and talk about the presuppositional apologetics thing, okay? Because they are shying away from evolution. They all guys, when they go on these forums, and these little monsters go on these forums and these YouTube comments and things like that, guys, don't be intimidated by these people and their hatred, okay? They act like they know what they're talking about, but the reason they don't want to come on our show is because in reality they don't know what they're talking about. They're not educated enough on this issue to even talk about it. I had one guy one time come on, we had a 2-hour podcast on an old episode where a guy came on to talk about evolution. Listen to it for yourself. He had no clue what he was talking about. But he insisted that he knew a lot about it. And after that podcast, I never did hear from him again. Never once. So he just kind of took off after that one. But the point is that I'm trying to get to, I'm sorry I went off on that kind of tangent there. But my point in saying this is that when you talk with these people, they are insistent they know what a species is. Because how dare you say the evolutionists don't know what they're talking about? But yet here I'm quoting you, the biologists and the genetic researchers who are saying we don't know what it is. On both sides, those who believe in evolution and those who don't. I'm not even, folks, even in these quotations, I'm not even quoting to you Christians at all. I'm telling you, on their front, they're saying that they don't know what this is. Chris Johnson didn't say this. They said it. Well, I said it too, but I do say, I apologize. I do say that they don't know what it is. But I'm trying to quote to you them, so you don't just have to trust them and take my word for it. Here's another definition. I said, okay, let's just go to a regular dictionary. Just a regular dictionary under the term biology, and we did at dictionary.com. Here's what it said. Related individuals that resemble one another are able to breed among themselves, but are not able to breed with members of another species. Okay, now before we continue here, dictionaries, I have found, are often unwilling to be corrected. It's amazing how little they are willing to be corrected, because somebody is writing this thing and there's a whole lot of pride built up in what they've written. But anytime you see somebody use the word to define itself, because what happened, it says, but are not able to breed with a member of another species. They use the term species in the description to define the word species. That is a total contradiction. Okay, it's circular reasoning. You can't do that. All right. That's where if I gave you the word, I said I came to your house and I said there's a ziggish in your house. That's a word I just made up. Okay, there's a ziggish in your house. You have no idea what I'm talking about. They said, well, what's a ziggish? And I said, well, it's like a big blue ziggish. You would still have no idea what I'm talking about because I used the word to define itself. So when they define species and use the word species in the definition, you have no idea what it means. You have to use other words, okay? Let's use your words, right? Telling the dictionary they need to use their words is unbelievable. But this is their definition under biology. So what I'm going to do is give you an example, all right? We're going to take a dog, a wolf, and a coyote, all right? Now, if you guys are following along on the website, again, those of you who want to follow along, just type in the word evolution into the search bar at creationliberty.com. There's an article called Evolutionism, Another New Age Religion. You can follow along, or you can click the link in the description on the YouTube channel if you're listening there. But if you're looking at this picture, I've got a picture of a dog, wolf, and a coyote here. Okay, so now I'm going to read you portions of this definition we got from dictionary.com, and I want you to see if you can. Because some of you might be thinking, well, it was more specific. Okay, well, let's see if we can narrow this down. Related individuals. Now, you guys answer me. Let me hear your answers. Okay, would you say the dog and the wolf and the coyote are related individuals?
Yep.
Okay, they're related individuals. It says that resemble one another. Does the dog, wolf, and the coyote resemble one another?
Yep.
Okay. That they're able to breed among themselves. Are they able to breed among themselves?
As far as I know, yep.
Okay. But they're not able to breed with members of another species. Now, here's where the confusion comes in. Because the dog, the wolf, and the coyote are all classified as separate species. But wait a second, what? They're able to breed among themselves, but not able to breed with members of another species. But yet these are all classified as different species, but they're all breeding among themselves. There's Canis domesticus, which is the dog, the Canis lupus, which is the wolf, and the Canis latrans, which is the coyote. So what exactly is a species again? Hopefully you guys can see now how we're showing how there is no clear definition of species. I'll probably have some YouTube commenters or something like that, people that actually would spend the time to listen to this, try to say, we do too know what a species is, and they will give some dumb definition that you can show clear examples of contradiction. Every time I've had them try to define it, I show clear examples of contradiction where they have to and then if you continue the discussion with them, they try to edit more and re-edit their definition until they can try to worm their way out of the situation that they have no clue what they're talking about. If anybody should know what they're talking about on this issue, it should be 35-year veteran professor of biology, Dr. William Moore. In a live debate, Dr. Moore was asked to define the term species, and this was his response. Quote, "This is my area of research, and to be honest with you, I don't know." End quote. I mean, he went on to talk about how they've had these big meetings in these big cities with all these scientists who still today scientists, they're really evolutionists, who still today cannot narrow down what the term species actually means. And some people, and I appreciate Dr. Moore's honesty, at least he's being honest and admitting that he doesn't know. Most evolutionists will not admit that they don't know. But they really don't. I don't care what they want to admit. There is no good definition for it. And until then, and here's what they do. The worst part about it is what they do is they'll say, okay, we have this term species, even though it's not defined. They have no idea what it means. But they said there are millions of species out there. Now, what did that one geneticist say, that really the way that they're determining what a species is? If somebody names it a different species, they give it a binomial name. If they give it this name, which is really, they give it this long Latin nonsense that nobody can understand because they have to make themselves seem so prestigious and so intelligent that the average person can't understand this. Oh, this is Canis domesticus. Okay, it's a dog, all right? Speak in simple terms. But if somebody names it, therefore it becomes that. So what they do is they come along in the 19th, 20th century and start giving all these different animals these different names and calling it a different species. Then they turn around and said, aha, see, there are millions of species on the planet, billions even of species on the planet, and there's no way that Noah could have gotten 2 of each of the billions of species on the planet onto the ark. Do you see the problem with this? They are coming along, making their own classification of things, which they don't even have defined. They don't know what it actually means. They just start putting a bunch of names on stuff, then turn around and retroactively apply that to the Bible to say the Bible's wrong. See, it's the wickedness of their hearts. Continuing here, now not only do they not know what a species is, but now we have to go to what I would call the Bible of evolutionism, which is the geologic column. Okay, this is the source of everything that they're claiming about the history of the world is coming from the geologic column. The basis on which they decide dates for like radiometric dating and things like that, which we're going to discuss pretty soon. The way that they actually get all that information is simply looking to the geologic timescale, which is something that is made up from pure imagination. Okay, this is a quotation from in AGS Publishing General Science textbook, it says, quote, using evidence from the rock record and fossil record, scientists have developed the geologic timescale. The geologic timescale is an outline of major events in the Earth's history, end quote. So these are major events. This is the geologic timescale, major events. That's what they're referring to every time they try to give dates or times for anything. If anything that they're looking at does not match up to the geologic column, any evidence at all, whether it's archaeology, whatever it is, it doesn't match up with the geologic column, they have to find an excuse for it or they throw it out and ignore it. Period. I don't care what an evolutionist wants to tell you about how it works. This is exactly how it works. Now, the textbooks, some of them, very rare, but some of them have been honest about this issue. This HVA Earth Science textbook says if there was a column of sediments deposited continuously since the formation of the Earth, the entire history of the planet could be reconstructed. Notice it says if there were a column of sediments. Unfortunately, no such column exists. Okay? There is no such column. At least some people will admit to it that it doesn't really exist. So before the early 1900s, most people knew the Earth was only a few thousand years old. But in 1788, there's a man named James Hutton, and he wrote a book called The Theory of the Earth, in which he suggested the Earth to be much older than most people knew it to be. Because again, like I said, they only knew it to be a few thousand years old. He's suggesting older. Then Hutton's book influenced a young Scottish lawyer by the name of Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell hated the Bible. He hated God's authority over his life. And he wrote a book called Principles of Geology, in which he emphasized his hatred for the Word of God in there. Okay? In his book, on page 30, he calls the Bible false conclusions, futile reasoning, ancient doctrines sanctioned by the implicit faith of many generations and supposed to rest on scriptural authority. He says it's supposed to rest on scriptural authority, and he throws out scriptural authority. He hates that. On page 302, he says men of superior talent, by the way, he's talking about himself, who thought for themselves and were not blinded by authority. Okay? That's what he was, this is his attitude towards this whole thing. He hates the Bible, he hates God, and he wants to find something else to justify himself. From the book Life, Letters, and Journals of Sir Charles Lyell, in there, Lyell said his goal was to free the science from Moses. That was a direct quote from him. He said that's what his goal, what he was trying to do. He didn't want any truth to be coming from the Bible. So, why is it important to know the link from James Hutton who questioned God's word, to Charles Lyell? Well, because Charles Lyell first hated the Word of God before seeking out any evidence. He hated God's Word first and foremost. So it's a presupposition, okay? Evolutionism is a presupposition. We're assuming this to be true when there is no evidence for it whatsoever. So he's looking for another way to cast doubt on the Bible. He's not converted. Lyell, he was not converted by evidence into evolution. You need to understand that. He already hated the Christian God of the Bible, and he was seeking something else altogether. The second point I want to make is that with the help of a couple other people, that Charles Lyell created the geologic column from pure hypothetical imagination. It's not based on experimental discovery or traveling the world and digging through tons of sediment layers to find all this evidence. No. He created it out of pure imagination. He said if the world was formed over slow, long periods of time, okay, if that's true, then this is what it should look like. That's where it came from. He's a lawyer from Scotland. He had a side hobby of geology, but he was a lawyer. And Charles Lyell's book was also able to influence a young man with a brand new degree in religious studies, and his name was Charles Darwin, who took his book with him aboard the HMS Beagle, I think was what he was going around to go look at all these finches on these Galapagos Islands and all that. And so James Hutton questioned the age of the Earth, who influenced Charles Lyell, who made up this geologic column from pure imagination, who then influenced Charles Darwin, who tried to create some imaginary way of biologically tying these all together. And Charles Lyell is really more along the lines of who introduced this lie called uniformitarianism, which is, I mean, it's based on pure assumption. James Hutton had some influence on this as well. But uniformitarianism, it's a long word that just simply means the way things are happening now are the way they've always been happening through slow, gradual processes. So uniformitarianism in geology means that all the sedimentary layers and everything in the world that we witness today, that's the way it's been going on for millions and billions of years. The slow decay and the slow erosion and all this stuff has been going on. And it ignores any kind of catastrophes that would happen. Of course, what they do today, though, is if there is something in their geologic timescale they can't explain, they throw in a catastrophe. Well, we can't explain how the dinosaurs went extinct, so we're going to throw a meteorite in there. Well, we can't explain how we're finding some of these different mammoths or things like that in the wrong place, so we're going to throw an ice age in there. We don't know how the mammoths, we find them frozen solid with food still undigested in their stomachs. We can't figure out how we find that, so we're just going to throw an ice age in there. They throw in a catastrophe when it's convenient for them to do so. But outside of that, they ignore catastrophes because they know any kind of catastrophe, especially a global flood, like in the days of Noah, would destroy anything of the geologic column being accurate. So they have to ignore that. Okay. Now, I'm going to read you 2 Peter 3, chapter 3, starting in verse 3. It says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of. Well, it's about to say what they're willingly ignorant. That means I'm going to be stupid, and I'm going to do so on purpose. I intentionally do not want to know anything about this. That's what willful ignorance is. I don't know, and I don't want to know. Of what? That by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. Now, of course, the earth standing out of the water and in the water, my personal take on that, because I do not see that talking about the flood. Because if you look at the next verse, and I know this, I'm getting ahead of myself on some of the teachings we're going to do, because I am going to eventually go over, what was the world like before the flood, that kind of thing. We do a whole seminar on that stuff, and we'll go through that eventually, which a lot of people seem to find interesting. A lot of Christians, seem to find that topic fascinating. And that whole discussion, it may not be so much a biblical discussion as it's going to be, it will be about the Bible, but a lot of it's theoretical. We don't really know. I'm just trying to give some ideas of what it could have been like before the flood, and that's all I can do. But notice here it says, the earth standing out of the water and in the water. It says, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. You notice here, it talks about the earth standing out of the water and in the water, and then talks about the global flood. The earth standing out of the water and in the water, I believe, is the canopy of water that used to be above the earth. And now, I personally believe it was in the form of ice. That's a whole other issue, and I realize that the most mainstream, creationist organizations, they deny this canopy stuff. Well, you're perfectly welcome to deny whatever you want, okay? But the Bible does talk about a firmament, the atmosphere, and that there was water above the firmament. And we'll discuss that more another time, but I wanted to point that out here as we were going by this, that 2 Peter 3 actually, 3 through 7 is what I'm reading here. This actually differentiates, it puts a separation between the earth standing out of the water and in the water, and then the flood. Very interesting. Anyway, they're ignorant of these things. They're ignorant of the creation, and they're ignorant of the flood. And they're ignorant of the coming judgment. It says, but the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. God is preserving the world as it is for now, but it's being preserved unto fire, because it's going to be judged and the world's going to be cleansed by fire. So they're ignorant of these things. They don't want to know. They're scoffers. Just like when you hear someone come up and say, "Oh, the Bible's false conclusions and futile reasonings and ancient doctrines because we are so superior and we're not blinded by authority," do you think that's not a scoffer? A scoffer again is somebody that goes, that's a scoffer, okay? And they scoff at the Bible. I mean, Charles Lyell was one of these scoffers who's walking after his own lust, and he's willfully ignorant of these things. And so he makes this stuff up by imagination. Okay? But when it also says in here that all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation, do you see what he's saying here is that the way the things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. It's describing the concept of uniformitarianism here. And so this is from a book called What is Creation Science? This is from Henry Morris and Gary Parker, who said, quote, "This standard geologic column is supposed to be at least 100 miles thick. Some writers say up to 200, and by the way, before we continue, because a lot of people will be like, well, that's Henry Morris, and he's an idiot, we don't trust him, blah, blah. Okay, whatever you want, I'm going to give you multiple sources and quotations from different scientists you can go and refer to here, okay? But I have seen in textbooks, some textbooks have even taught that it should be 100 miles thick, if it existed. But he's pointing out here, he continues and says, some writers say up to 200 miles, that's 320 kilometers for those of you that live in Europe. It says, representing the total sedimentary activity of all the geologic ages. However, the average thickness of each local geologic column is about 1 mile. In some places, the column has essentially zero thickness. In a few places, it may be up to 16 or so miles, but the worldwide average is about 1 mile. The standard column has been built up by superposition of local columns from many different localities." End quote. Now, there's a teacher, Lorraine will probably remember her, Ann, we used to work with a while ago. She was another one of those that left that Creation Evidence Expo with that Fred Boyd, that guy who's doing all sorts of Levin stuff in there. She left that soon after we left. She left as well. But she was a really good teacher. She taught younger kids. And she was really good, and she would teach. She had all sorts of science experiments for them to do and activities. And she was an elementary school teacher anyway. She was used to that kind of stuff. But she had a really interesting display that she had made, where she had put up a bunch of fabric layers to show people how exactly the layers end up working. And if you actually talk to somebody who actually does geological work, they know full well that the geologic column is not what they actually find. They'll find all sorts of layers in all sorts of mixing in all sorts of places, and there'll be layers shoved up in weird contorted positions that are, I mean, nothing looks like this perfect like onion skin layer that they're trying to give you the impression. Or you see this, the image you see here of the geologic column, when you're looking at it on here, this is not what it looks like when you're digging down to the earth. They give you that impression in the textbook, but the textbook is the only place you're going to find that. Because in reality, there's a weird mixing of the layers. Now, continuing here, this is from Dr. Steve Austin in his article from ICR, 10 Misconceptions About the Geologic Column. He says, quote, "The notion that the Earth's crust has an onion skin structure with successive layers containing all the strata systems distributed on a global scale is not according to the facts." Now, when he's talking about an onion skin, that's where you peel back an onion, you have a layer, you pull back another layer and another layer. He says the Earth is not like this. He continues and says approximately 77% of the Earth's surface area on land and under the sea has 7 or more, that's 70% or more, of the strata systems missing beneath. 94% of the Earth's surface has 3 or more systems missing beneath, and an estimated 99.6% has at least one missing system. End quote. So, when almost 80% of the world is missing more than 70% of your so-called scientific model, I think it's time to throw it out. Okay? But they won't. Why would they not throw that out? Because it's a religion. It's not science. They're not doing science. It's simply religious belief. They believe strongly in this. There is a multi-trillion-dollar industry over evolutionism. and all the books and everything that's been written and all the pride everybody has up in their degrees and their grants and everything else, there is no way they're going to get rid of this. It's a cult, folks, and that's why I said Christians should really approach this as a religious cult, because that's what it is. This is from geologist Dr. John Woodmarapp from his article on Creation Science Quarterly. He says it's called The Essential Non-Existence of the Evolutionary Uniformitarian Geologic Column. It says, quote, 80 to 85% of the Earth's land surface does not even have 3 geological periods appearing in correct consecutive order. Okay? They're not appearing in the correct order at all. He continues and says it becomes an overall exercise of gargantuan special pleading and imagination for the evolutionary uniformitarian paradigm to maintain that there ever were geologic periods. End quote. It's mental gymnastics built on towers of assumptions. Okay. This next one this is again from Steve Austin. He says, quote, only a few locations on Earth, about 0.4% of its area, 0.4%. It's not even 1%, have been described with the succession of the 10 systems beneath. That's in West Nepal, West Bolivia, and Central Poland. Even where the 10 systems may be present, geologists recognize individual systems to be incomplete. The entire geologic column, composed of complete stratus systems, exists only in the diagrams drawn by geologists. End quote. Well, that's what I was talking about earlier. The only place you're going to find them is in the textbook. It's only in the drawings that they make, the computer diagrams they make all this stuff. That is the only place you're finding the geologic column, and geologists know this. The geologists that do work in the field know this. But they believe the geologic column anyway, because that is the religion you have to believe in to even hardly participate in the scientific community anymore. It's a religious cult. Okay. Now, some evolutionists, because that's what, to further, I guess, explain what Steve Austin was just saying, because there's some evolutionists that I've heard say, well, there's about 30 places on the planet where the geologic column doesn't match up. No, you have 30 places on the planet where you found fossils in the order you wanted to find them in. But that doesn't mean the geologic column exists. Okay. This is again from Henry Morris and Gary Parker, quote, the geologic column is supposed to represent a vertical cross-section through the Earth's crust with the most recently deposited, therefore youngest rocks at the surface, and the oldest, earliest rocks deposited on the crystalline basement rocks at the bottom. So all he's just saying there, he says you have the youngest rocks on the top, oldest rocks on the bottom. He continues and says, if one wishes to check out this standard column, where can he go to see it for himself? There's only one place in all the world to see the standard geologic column. That's in the textbook. End quote. That's what I've been trying to explain to people. Okay. There's some evolutionary geoscientists that have been at least a little bit more honest about this problem. Okay. The guy that I'm going to quote here, he's believes in evolution, but here this is John Glewis from his book Petroleum Geoscience. Now he's a geoscience professor at the University of Durham, and he co-wrote the book with the managing director of Geopressure Technology Limited. They said, quote, the truth is that it is very difficult to establish a strategic column that is an accurate representation of the past. The cause of this is manifold. To begin with, there is no correct answer with which to compare our attempts at stratigraphic analysis. End quote. One more time, in case you didn't catch that. There is no correct answer with which to compare our attempts at stratigraphic analysis. Translated, what he's saying is, we have a geologic column that we're trying to line up, but we have no correct answer with which to compare this. So, if you have no correct answer with which to compare it, there's no way to verify what you're saying is true. Why not? Why can't you dig in the ground to verify it? Because when you dig in the ground, that's not what you find. And he knows full well there's a great mixing of the different sedimentary layers and a great mixing of the fossil layer. So this is something that they understand. There's no way to actually get one standard graph or chart of the entire world. You'd have to go to specific areas, which they know they're not going to be able to do and make just one generalized thing of it. It's not going to work that way. They know this, okay? But this geologic column, which they can't verify is accurate at all, there has been no evidence to verify its accuracy, and all the experimental research has shown that it's not accurate in the least. 80% of it incorrect, that's missing 7 or more of these things that they said are supposed to be in there, and they call this science? You gotta be kidding me. But they use this geologic column. This is what they're using in order to use radiometric dating, which hopefully we're going to discuss next week, okay? This is New Science Magazine, volume 100. It says, quote, "Apart from very modern examples, which are really archaeology, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used to date fossils," end quote. Why would he say that? Why would that be in New Science Magazine? Why would he say this in general? Because what people don't seem to understand, and like I said, we'll talk about it more next week. What people don't seem to understand is that the dating methods that they're using, they're not actually dating fossils. That's not what they're doing. And when they date things, they get a long list of wild numbers all over the scale that range from young, old, everywhere. And how do they know which ones are correct? They don't. From a simply scientific standpoint, they have no idea which one of them is correct. So what do? They go to the geologic timescale, the geologic column, find out which dates most closely match where they found it. Because that's what they do when you bring something in to be dated like that. And if you tell them, if you don't tell them how old it is, they'll just date it. If you tell them how old it is, or if you tell them like what it is that you're dating, like you said, oh, this is a dinosaur bone, I want you to date this. They say, they're going to ask you where you found it, and that kind of thing. And if you say it's a dinosaur bone, then the only dates they're going to cherry pick out of their long list of dates are the ones that match the geologic column. This is from Yale University Department of Geology and Geosciences in the American Journal of Science, volume 276. It said, quote, "Radiometric dating would not have been feasible if the geologic column had not been erected first," end quote. Well, I thought this radiometric dating was supposed to be all scientific. I thought this was supposed to be a scientific process that they were using. No, it's not. It's not at all a scientific process, because all they do is they simply take that range of dates, they go back to the geologic column and compare the two. And we'll discuss that more, like I said, next week, okay? And the problem is what they're having to do in these textbooks in classrooms is lie to students to show them this geologic timescale and make them believe that this is what they're actually finding in nature. Then what they do is when they get older, and they have all this hatred built up in them because they're trying to defend all their lusts, they'll run into a Christian like you and me, and when it tries to show them the truth about this, and then they're insistent, no, that's wrong, that can't be true. Because after all, they learned it in their school, they learned it from their college professor, okay? And there's no way they could be wrong, because they respect persons and all this other junk, okay? They're looking to justify their sin, they're looking to justify their lust. That's the whole point of this. And it's all a bunch of junk that's been made up by lies. So anyway, that's where we're going to stop for today, because if I get into another topic, it's going to take us too long, and I don't think we have the time to continue on that. So does anybody have any questions or comments about any of this before we end today?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where can we, well, I know most of this is on the articles and stuff, but is there like a list of quotes from these scientists and professors, like, to go directly to?
A list of them? Like, I don't know what you're looking for. Like, I just gave you a list of them.
Yeah, like a specific list, more like, a page dedicated to their quotes is what I'm asking.
I don't have a specific page dedicated to their quotes. That's why I talk about because there's quotes on every page. I quote people all the time on all sorts of evolution articles and textbooks and scientists, and I quote them all the time on all the evolution stuff. I mean, if you want more quotes on certain topics, I'm not sure if it contains that. Let me see. Hold on a second. I'm looking for a book. I have. Where is that book? Oh, here it is. Hang on a second. Let me grab it. And I think if you're looking for more stuff, I'm Hold on, let me check it. I'm going to check the back and see if I can find it. Sorry, just give me a second. Yeah, actually you can. If you want even more, and I probably still need to go through this book again and get some more out of here, there's a book by Henry Morris called That Their Words May Be Used Against Them, quotes from evolutionists useful for creationists. And it has a book, there are thousands of quotes in this. The whole book, it's not any writing. All it is quote after quote after quote, and with all the proper detailed references in it. Actually, a pretty good book. I've got a copy of it here I'm looking at, and there's a section in Chapter 9 called The Geologic Column and its Fossils. So this is something I may even need to go into and pull out some more stuff that I don't even have on here yet, and quote these guys concerning those issues. But you can, the beginning of the book has listed out all the different topics, and then you can go to the back of the book if you're looking for a specific name, and you can look them up by name in the index in the back. So that would be one if you're looking for more on that. But if you go to any of the articles on our website, because that book, I think that the words may be used against them is kind of expensive depending on what you get, because mine's like a hardback copy. But if you want to get, I'm going to be adding more as we go through this. And you don't have the money to spend on that, you can just go through some of our evolution articles, and there's quotations on all of them from a wide variety of sources. So that's all I can say on that one. Anybody else any questions or comments before we close? I want to thank everybody again for joining us this week, and may our Lord Jesus Christ bless you all as you study His Word, and we'll see you next week.